So let's move on to my favorite part of the Dungeons and Dragons news podcast on Speaking Common with DM and player tips. Here we go. DM tip number 1, when introducing a new player to the game, give them specific directions, options, and quests. They're going to need a little bit more direction than some of your veteran players. Now, we know that if you've got a couple of sessions or campaigns or even one game underneath you, you're going to be a little bit more savvy with what to expect. You understand abilities a little bit more. You understand when and how to expect skill checks and how the real open sourcedness of living in a breathing world can let you do effectively anything you want. But as I'm introducing more and more new players to the game, I'm finding that I was conflicted with my want to leave their player agency intact and their desire to have a little bit more direction and orientation around the game. So I found that early on, I was not giving them nearly enough. They were getting confused, wondering what they can do or what they can't do. Because as veteran players, we're typically beyond the idea that, what am I allowed to do? The answer is anything you want, you can try, right? So when you have new players to the game, try structuring the adventure a little bit more. Give them clear objectives, clear contacts to liaise with, to progress quests and missions, and create quests and missions, much like you would expect from let's say, a video game. While I don't like to use that as the model for D&D because I feel like it funnels things a little bit too much, be mindful that new players, they might need that direction. They might want that direction. And it's really about creating an atmosphere of fun and engagement for them at the table. So don't get too caught up in your own need to give them freedom and liberty, because they might need a little bit of direction early on. And then you can slowly ease them into the big, bad open world and the idea of try it. You can do just about anything, because as we know, the beauty of the game, once truly unlocked, is your ability to do anything that you can creatively imagine or think of if you got the rolls for it. DM tip number 2, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge proponent of music in my game. I've got to have ambient music. I personally use Spotify to manage this and a Bluetooth speaker behind me. It's a pretty simple setup, but it adds such a tremendous element of immersion to the game that I really dislike going into battle, so to speak, without it. I use Spotify to organize playlists for forests, elven cities, temples, combat, dungeons, traveling, general fantasy music, a huge host and roster of playlists that I've collected. Now, if I'm playing offline, I can use music from anywhere that I just like, but I also have a provider that is giving me permission to use their music in my Charisma Check podcast in our actual play, which is coming up sometime early this year. I've sought the permission of those creators because that music is going to be featured in a public medium when we share the content out. So if you are using music for something that you're planning on sharing, or certainly something you're monetizing, please make sure you have permission, that you've properly accredited the musicians for their hard work too. But I digress. There are a lot of other great platforms like Sirenscape, Battle Bards, anything like that to give you the equipment and tools that you need to bring music into your game. I highly recommend it. I think it just, as long as there are no words, lyrics, or anything like that, it really does create an excellent immersion for your players and for you when you're spinning and weaving these tales. Avoid anything that's too iconic. If you're in the middle of something that you've created and then suddenly the booming, Lord of the Rings theme comes on, people are going to come out of your game and instantly start thinking about Lord of the Rings. So try to use soundtracks that are a little bit more obscure. They can't immediately be tied to another franchise or IP. Second one is avoid things that have heavy lyrics, because as soon as lyrics and words come into the mix, you're going to feel like you're competing with somebody else talking at the table, and so are your players. So avoid lyrics and words. The third one is avoid any high pitching or vaulting extremes in the music. So if there's something that's cool and ambient and then suddenly blasts in with like a face melting guitar shredding solo, that's going to take away and really impact the flow and ebb of the game that you're trying to run and the chill or the vibe that you're looking to create. So avoid vaulting extreme dynamics in the music and avoid high pitched tones or instruments. Try to skip the bagpipes if you can, things like that. So otherwise, press play and get into the adventure. All right, my third DM tip for this week is about alignment. always polarizing. I always say use alignment as an orientation point for new characters if you want to or need to, but be prepared for that alignment to change and flex over time, just like we as people change as a result of our influences and our personal choices over time. I'm personally not a big fan of alignment overall, and I really don't put much value in it. For some new players who like to use it as a way to figure out how their players are out of the gate, fine, let's go ahead and bring it in. But like I said, I never anchor people to their alignment. There are some game mechanics that require it to be used, so it's nice to have on the sheet. But otherwise, I really do feel that players and characters and how they're morally inclined is a direct result of how they behave in the game. And I cover all this type of stuff into session 0, so it's not surprising to anyone when morality and alignment really come into the picture. If you might be lawful good, and through the course of your adventures, your experiences and your influences and what you see and experience on the road, you might shift, you might become a little bit more neutral. It's far more interesting when a character begins to suddenly question and reevaluate those moral standpoints too. So why would you want to cut that off and deny your players and you the ability to really explore the arcs and roller coaster of moral evolution as the game goes by? So just consider it. I know there are a lot of people with really strong stances on alignment and how it applies to the game, but just think about the idea of how a person's moral leaning can change based on their surroundings and their influences in the game. All right, kicking off the last 2 tips, we have player tip number 1 for the week. Get excited about your fellow players' interactions, timelines, stories, and combat as if though it were your own. Don't just sit around the table and wait for your turn to come around. Pay attention when your fellow players are engaged in an interaction or dialogue with an NPC or interacting with the environment around them. It's going to, first of all, help you establish much better etiquette at the table when everyone practices flexing those listening muscles and are tuned in and interested. It lets the people who are the focus at the moment really enjoy the limelight without it being taken from them or interrupted constantly. Lets them stay in the flow. And for you as a character, you might pick up on things that, of course, you don't want to meta, but might be interesting for you to know as your collective story plays out. So be part of the table story, not just wait around for your turn to shine. And my final player tip for this week is have a plan B. This is one I'm reiterating from before, but I needed a 5th tip after the holidays, honestly, so here it is. When in combat, have a plan B. Think about what you want your character to do ahead of time, so when your turn comes around, the table's not waiting for you to decide and you're ready to jump into action. But of course, plan B will make sure that creature you are about to grapple gets killed by someone else, or the wall you were going to kick off of to try and get around to the back of your big bad evil guy now is blown open by wild magic surge. That could happen. Always have a plan B so that when plan A fails, you've got a contingency. If you have to go to plan C, well then hopefully that's going to be rare. But either way, the key is about having a plan in advance so that you can keep combat fluid and moving around the table. And with these tips for the week, hopefully that'll set you up for gaming advice and tricks that you can use today or at least in your next game.